Um, so before I begin, we're delighted to have Matthew Barber with us today, and we're very grateful for his office for supporting us with this series. So I'll give over Matthew Barber just to say a couple of words before we begin.
Uh, well, thank you very much indeed. I won't take up too much time because you don't want to hear from me. You want to learn more about the online advertising of cosmetic body alterations. But really pleased to be able to support Oxford Against Cutting in doing this series. I think it's really worthwhile work. The Most people are understandably and quite reasonably concerned about crimes in the real world. The vehicle crime, car crime, knife crime, all those sorts of things. And sadly, none of those go away entirely. But actually, the real world crime, almost however you measure it, has been falling over the last 20 odd years. And certainly since the pandemic, things like burglary are down about two-thirds from where they were just back in 2019. It still lives large in people's minds because it is such an obviously intrusive crime. But the stuff that goes on online, people often don't talk about, and that's where there is a much wider risk to pretty much all of us, and some of the vulnerabilities around it aren't as obvious. You can put a big heavy lock on your door. You can stay at home. You can stick to a well lit area, and you think you can make yourself safe. There are things you can do to protect yourself online, and hopefully, some of the learning from sessions like this will really help. But I think people don't always recognise where they're vulnerable around online crime, and it is definitely a growing area. We have new things that simply weren't crimes 10 or 20 years ago because the technology didn't exist, and we also have traditional crime, certainly areas of domestic abuse, which are now just enabled through technology, using the same old crimes, but being carried out in different ways. So, really grateful to you all at Obstacles Cutting for organising these, and really interested to find out more myself in the session.
Oh, thank you very much, Matthew. You'll definitely be finding out a lot more about cosmetics online surgery with us today. So for this session, we'd really like the young people to be the forefront of today's discussion. So if you are a professional or supporting young people, you're more than welcome to stay in the space, but we would like young people to sort of lead the conversation. So if we could lead the discussion to young people, that would be great. Unless, of course, you have any burning questions as well. And to all the young people that are here today, if you're hoping to receive a certificate for attending the 5 sessions, please do message Dot privately in the chat box, and then she'll be able to sign you in as well. So before I introduce our guest speakers for today, there's just a couple bits of housekeeping that we want to go through first. So I believe, is it Tanya, you'll be going over that for me?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, good. So welcome to today's session. Just a few housekeeping rules that we've got in place, if that's okay. So the first half of today's session will be a discussion between Ahd and our guest speakers, and this section will be recorded, which I believe it is recording at the moment. After this, we'll stop the recording and open up the discussion for our young participants to ask questions and share their thoughts. We hope to create a non-judgmental space during the discussion by respecting one another's opinions. There is no pressure to join in conversation if you would prefer to just listen. If you are contributing a lot to the discussion, please also be mindful of allowing others some time to speak too. If you're sharing any stories, please anonymize them. If anyone tells us anything that makes us concerned for a child or a vulnerable adult, then we will have to pass this information on. Please be aware, if you choose to have your camera off today, then we may ask you to turn it on briefly just so we can see who you are. We will share support services in the chat box during each session. So if you have any worries that you'd like to talk to us privately about, please do email Dot. We'll place the email address in the chat box. Just note that we're not a frontline service. We've got somebody taking notes for us today, and it will be all anonymized as well, and just of the key themes to help us with to feed into ideas for future sessions. And finally, comments can be made in the chat box, either to individuals only or the whole group. Just to note, you can select who you want to speak with in the chat area. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tanya. So like we said, today's session is going to be about online advertising and cosmetic body alterations. So I'll just introduce our guest speakers for today. So we're very lucky today. We have two guest speakers. So we have Charlotte and Dot amongst us. So Charlotte is currently a PhD student from the Law Faculty of Oxford University, and she's studying about how legislation about minimum wage at which female adolescents can change sexual activities and access to abortion, and how that's changed since 1955 to 2018. And she also uses both archival research and interviews with professionals working with young women to understand what factors have driven this. And her interests in projects span between reproductive justice and history of theme parks. So very, very interesting. And we also have Dot with us. So Dot's a member of Oxford Against Cutting, and as part of her role, she speaks to young people in schools and community groups about the pressures of beauty standards, including where beauty standards have come from and how we can challenge them today. So I'd just like to say thank you both of you so much today for joining us. So I'll just start off with a couple of questions. So first of all, I think I'll ask this question to Charlotte. But what are the regulations on advertising cosmetic procedures, either surgical or non-surgical, and specifically at under 18s?
Well, the law changed in May 2022, and it is largely in the hands of the regulator called the Advertising Standards Authority, which regulates all forms of advertisements, both on the television, on radio, on billboards, but also, perhaps most relevantly for our discussion, online adverts. The rule is now that it is illegal to advertise what has been described as cosmetic body alterations. So that includes cosmetic body alterations which are obviously surgical, breast enlargements, nose jobs, liposuction, but also some invasive procedures that are not surgical, we might not think of as immediately surgical, such as teeth whitening. Oh, sorry. And under the new rules, these ads promoting these services are not allowed on TV, radio, or any websites, including, say, a YouTube video, which is clearly directed at the under 18s. But also, and this is possibly where things become a bit more complicated, such advertising is also not allowed where under 18s make up at least 25% of the likely audience. So that now, as you may well know, with the very rare exceptions to do with usually congenital disorders, cosmetic body alterations are not permitted for under 18s.
Perfect, thank you. And so you said there was a new legislation that entered in May 2022. Do you think that this is a foolproof legislation, or do you think there might potentially be loopholes in it where maybe certain influencers, certain brands can sort of work their way around it?
Well, as a lawyer, all legislation has loopholes. I can see some fairly big loopholes, and I think the one which may jump out most obviously is that this figure of 25%. So if 24% of your target audience for a video is under 18, then you can still advertise cosmetic alterations. Of course, given the incredibly large scope of online videos and the millions of times they can be watched, that's potentially a lot of people under the age of 18 watching those adverts. Dot, what loopholes do you see?
It's probably also, I'm imagining, likely that actually more than 25%, or that figure, that percentage is actually higher, because lots of the online platforms will ask people for age verification. So they'll ask the person signing up to, say, Instagram, to tick a box saying that they are 18 or above. I think it's 18 or above rather than over 18. But actually, lots of people will be ticking that box who are under the age of 18. So that sort of regulation or tick box exercise isn't hugely helpful. So the figures are actually probably not quite right anyway. It might be that we think that 25% of people using the platform are under 18, but actually it might be even higher than that.
Yes, I would certainly agree. I will confess that in the very early days of Facebook, ticked all the boxes about, yes, I'm definitely 13, yes, I'm definitely 16 when I...
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because there's no repercussions either.
No.
And young people will think that they are mature enough to be going on, you know, a photo sharing platform like Instagram. Why shouldn't they feel like that? But then they might not be mature enough to be bombarded with all of the harmful content that's coming through.
I think that highlights one of the big difficulties we have with online spaces, which is that a lot of advertising guidance and advertising rules, because, for instance, we've had legislation for some years now that you can't target gambling advertising. People under the age of 18. That was some of the first to come in. Now, there is lots of data collected about who watches TV programs and constant surveys. So we can say with some confidence what the proportion of under 18s who are watching certain TV programs is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was... Sorry, Carol.
Oh, no, please.
No, I was just going to say that's quite interesting that you say that, because of course you're seeing there's a massive move from advertisements being made on like TV to now different platforms on social media. So you have like TikTok, Instagram, you have Snapchat as well, Facebook. But I suppose Facebook's maybe more targeted at the older audience, I'd suggest. But I know I've been on TikTok and I've seen, for example, like people be like, come spend the day with me, gonna go get a nose job, for example, or come spend a day with me, I'm gonna go get fillers in. And I was just wondering, have you guys ever seen that, or what do you guys think the impact of that is on young people? Because I know I've been in the comments sometimes and it said stuff like, oh, what doctor did you go to, or can you send me the address, or how was it? And it's just making it a lot more accessible for young people to get this knowledge. So what do you guys think about that?
I have seen a few cosmetic procedure adverts, I think exclusively on Instagram, but I'm not on TikTok. And interestingly, I've seen more of them when I've been traveling abroad to countries where particularly to when I travel to Asian countries where certain types of cosmetic procedures, particularly around eye surgery and eyelid surgery, are exceptionally common indeed. I've seen a few in the UK. You do raise a really interesting issue, though, about influencers, because I feel that the legislation that's been written hasn't really thought about the role influencers play, because and this came as a real surprise to me, but these restrictions are on advertisements. It doesn't count as an advertisement if an influencer is given reduced price cosmetic procedures, or even is paid to undergo a cosmetic procedure, and blog or post or put a reel up about it, as long as what they are giving is considered their honest review, i.e. they're not just writing exactly what they were told by the doctor or clinic to write. So they could be doing that. This could be an influencer who is very popular, predominantly popular with under 18s, and at present that's not caught by the legislation. And I'd be really interested to hear from our group later about how they feel about their relationships with influencers and how they would feel about an influencer telling the story of getting a nose job versus seeing a more traditional advert.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've seen a couple of these videos and I feel like they almost normalize the procedures because of their, and they are being increasingly normalized, we know that, but if you're sort of just seeing somebody sharing a story on Instagram, then like walking into the surgery, having it done, it almost feels very casual, even though obviously what's happening is really not very casual at all. I saw one that I thought was really interesting. This woman had, well, she was a very young woman. They made that early 20s. She'd had the fox eye surgery. And her whole face had sort of swollen and it looked really sort of stressful. And then at the end, she still finished the video by saying to her followers, everything's fine now and I'm really happy with the surgery. And there was a point during the film where I thought, oh, she's going to finish by saying, actually, it's not worth it. This was, hugely traumatic on the body and really scary. And I wish I hadn't gone for it. But she actually finished by saying it was, it's great. Another one where I saw a woman have like a really awful reaction to lip fillers, and her whole like bottom of her face had reacted to the injections. And again, she finished by saying, don't let this scare you off. This was just, a bad experience. So I was like, oh no. But yeah, I think seeing somebody so casually like walking in and having the surgery, it really sort of normalizes it, which feels quite worrying to me.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think also just staying on the topic of influencers, I'm sure you're both aware that if they do give an honest review, they call it, and if their target audience is under the age of 18, then influencers are allowed to accept reduced costs for their surgeries. So what do you guys think about this, if they're giving honest reviews to their viewers?
It seems obviously problematic to me, simply because the very act of accepting reduced cost surgery puts you as an influencer, particularly with something as momentous as this, in a vulnerable, dependent position vis-a-vis the clinic. It's one thing to accept some free makeup samples and then try them out, but this is a pretty momentous thing to have done. And I can very well imagine that people who have had it done are, because of shame, because of pressures, possibly not in the position to give an honest review.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
In a very different way to what I think is still being imagined by the people who legislate about advertising, which is that people are being given, I don't know, cosmetics or fidget toys or, squeezy things for free.
Yeah.
The other issue which I came across is restrictions in many countries, including most notably the US, about cosmetic procedures for under 18s are much laxer. So given that many of our influencers come from the US, many of our biggest influencers come from the US, I came across accounts in a US news article, which was very critical of the practice, of influencers who had started at the age of 16 having reduced price cosmetic procedures offered to them. And it described how some of them had felt the need to have more and more procedures because they'd found that their channel had a boost because people were curious about their experience. And so to keep that boost, and obviously the clinics offering the procedures to them were keen for them to continue receiving the surgeries and reviewing them. It described how influencers got to their early 20s and some had 4 procedures. Of course, sitting in the UK, you can still watch those US influencers. So you can see people exactly your own age having cosmetic procedures and giving really personal accounts.
Yes, no, that's very true. I think it's very, very concerning as well, the fact that that does happen. But then why do you think then, Dot, that so many young people are accessing cosmetic procedures, and what do you think the dangers, if any danger, if you would say there are any dangers, are?
Yeah. I think the pressure on young people and everybody, but especially on young people, the pressures coming from the beauty industry are just massive. And I think I imagine they've always been there, but I think the internet and the rise of social media platforms will have massively exacerbated it. And the trends, especially, I mean, when we talk to young people and we deliver workshops, we often kind of go back to try and get young people to think about, like, where is this really coming from? And often if you trace it back, there's usually money involved, companies, whether it's like wellness companies, beauty companies, surgeons, social media sort of giants, they all want to make money in whatever way they can. And so promoting like a new trend is a great way of doing that. So actually often it's not really about the beauty, it's about or the aesthetic so much as it's about the trend and selling this particular thing and making more money. And we've seen that with like the curve to like the slim body standards. So we obviously had like the Kardashian curve in, what was it, like 2010 onwards, and that would have given rise to lots of increase the demand for sort of BBL surgery, so the Brazilian butt lift and maybe like breast augmentation. But at some point, maybe they stopped making enough money, and so now we're coming back to like the slim body aesthetic. Those trends have to keep changing for people to make money. But I don't think young people are told about this enough. I don't think there's enough awareness. I think young people are very, very smart for sure, but I don't think I don't blame young people for not always thinking about that when they are just bombarded with huge amounts of pressure through social media to look a certain way, and when all they're seeing on their Instagram feed is a particular aesthetic, facially or body aesthetic, then of course they want to also look like that, or we, it affects all of us. I don't know if that answers your question.
I wondered, could you share the advertisement that we found?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me get it.
Yes, no, but I do definitely agree with you. It's very difficult if that's all you're seeing on social media, especially if these are people who have very, very large followings. And you're seeing there's like a rise and dip in like different types of trends with, like you said, with the whole Kardashians, and when they got their Brazilian butt lifts, and then they were kind of trying to transition back into the slimmer bodies as well. You're seeing that's happening a lot as well. And you sometimes hear it in like references to like music as well that people listen to.
Yeah.
That's very, very prominent amongst young people. So even if they're not actively like listening to it, you're subconsciously taking on this information, and it's like altering what your standard of what acceptable or what the ideal quote body is.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned the harms. I didn't speak on that, and there's like the really obvious harms of cosmetic body alterations, but I actually think also just the harm of like trying to reach an unattainable standard, like always trying to reach that standard and never getting there. Like that's surely the most harmful. And on top of that, you're spending money, or you're putting, harmful chemicals into your body, you're putting your body through trauma, and you're never going to be able to reach, because it's an impossible standard. That's the point of the beauty industry. Like that surely is, it's just, super harmful in itself.
And I don't know how we'd legislate it, but I think certainly adverts that are not directly advertising cosmetic procedures, but who include very well-known people like the Kardashians, who are very open about having undergone cosmetic procedures and are very open about the boost it's given to their career, even if they are advertising cosmetics, or even if a musician is advertising music, the impact on the young person watching, or any person watching, is still, well, they're clearly doing very well, they're aspirational, this advert makes me want to be like them. And one of the aspects clearly of being like them is to have this body image I can only attain through surgery.
Yeah.
No, that's very, very true. And how do you think then young people can go about getting support for body image?
Yeah. Charlotte, do you want to just quickly talk on this ad, and then I'll talk on?
Sure.
It's running a little bit over, but I think it's okay.
Found this ad interesting because this ad comes from 2017. It was for a cosmetic company called Mia. Actually, they had several of their ads banned. I haven't been able to get the video, but this is a still, and one of the women here is saying, "I can't believe I used to be so nervous about wearing a bikini in public. Now I feel fine." And the other woman replies, "You look amazing." And then there are 4 scenes, we've just taken 2 here. And then there's another scene, also set in a gym environment. Here, one of the women, I'm assuming one on the right, is saying, "After I lost the weight, my breasts were so saggy, and now they're full and perky again." And the woman on the left replies, "They look amazing." Now, even though this ad was broadcast before the ban on advertising cosmetic body alterations to under 18s, the Advertising Standards Agency still held that it was in breach of the standards. They had 2 reasons. One was that they felt that although the actresses were over the age of 21, some of them appeared to be younger and so might be particularly relatable to young women. But the particular harm was that the ad focused excessively on negative perceptions about bodies. And it promoted the idea that it was natural to feel self-conscious about a body, or to avoid certain activities, such as wearing a bikini, if women didn't have a certain body type. So this is one of the most one of the worst examples of ads that have gone out there, and that was why it was actually became quite infamous. But I suspect there are a great many ads out there quite similar that we just haven't caught. Dom.
Yeah, and that's what we see, isn't it? This idea that something is not right, that there is a fault, that there's a flaw, that there's something that needs to be improved, focusing on the negative, preying on people's insecurities, creating flaws that aren't really flaws in order to sell the product. Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful to see an example. So I will just share with you, I think this is going to be the easiest a slide that we use for our workshop. And this is definitely not all the support services available. Just a few examples. So my bar is covering the top of that, but I think it's the mix. At the top, so support anyone under 25, about anything troubling them. And there's Youth Access, which is a platform that can direct people to the local counselling services. And then there's Talk ED, offers support to anyone affected by eating disorders, and Beat also supports people with who are suffering with eating disorders. But there's also the NSPCC, Childline, there's school counsellors, and we'll probably hear as well when we stop the recording in a moment that other people on the call have know of some really great support services available. So there are services out there that can support young people who are struggling with body image, but I also think they might not necessarily realise, it doesn't always have to get to the point where someone has an eating disorder for them to be experiencing the pressures.
Thank you both. Yeah, that's definitely true that you don't have to sort of, I think a lot of the time, especially with like people when they try and get help, and the GPs as well, they kind of wait till it's like a bit too late, but you can definitely get help. And I think it's best to get early on rather than wait, as it might like make the situation a lot worse. But thank you very, very much for that discussion. It was very, very interesting. I'll now hand over to Tanya, as I think we might have a couple questions.